There is a list circulating on Telegram right now that reads like an intelligence dossier. 21 addresses, 11 countries, company names, city locations, and, in some cases, specific street addresses. It was not published by a hacker collective or leaked by a disgruntled official. It was published on April 15, 2026, by the Russian Defense Ministry itself, on its official Telegram channel, in full public view. The list names what Moscow claims are Ukrainian-linked drone manufacturing enterprises scattered across Europe, from London to Munich, Riga to Prague, Madrid to Venice, Haifa to Istanbul. 11 facilities are labeled as branches of Ukrainian companies in Europe. 10 more are designated as foreign enterprises producing components. Together, they form what the Russian military describes as a distributed network feeding strike drones into Ukraine's war machine. That alone would have been provocative. What came next turned provocation into something closer to a threat. Dmitry Medvedev, former president of Russia, now deputy chairman of Putin's Security Council, posted on X within hours of the list going live. His words were precise, deliberate, and designed to land hard. The Defense Ministry's statement, he wrote, should be taken extremely literally. The list of European facilities producing drones and other equipment, he continued, constitutes a register of potential legitimate targets for the Russian armed forces. Then the sign-off, dripping with menace. When strikes become a reality depends on what comes next. Sleep well, European partners. Now step back and look at what actually happened here. A nuclear-armed state, engaged in the largest land war in Europe since 1945, just published the addresses of factories on NATO territory and told Europe those addresses are potential military targets. That is not rhetoric, that is a targeting list distributed through a public channel, endorsed at the highest levels of Russia's security apparatus. The contradiction buried in this story is worth examining carefully because it reveals something important about where Moscow's head is at right now. And it is not where the Kremlin wants you to think it is. The timing is the first clue. The list dropped on April 15th, exactly one day after two events that clearly rattled Moscow. The first was in Berlin. On April 14th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz for a round of government-to-government consultations that produced the largest single German defense commitment to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began, a €4 billion package. Hundreds of Patriot missiles financed by Berlin under a direct contract between Ukraine and Raytheon. Additional Iris-T launchers from Diehl Defense, and, crucially, 10 bilateral agreements, including a framework for joint drone production. Zelensky and Merz were photographed inspecting 7 drone models produced at joint Ukrainian-German enterprises. As we covered in our previous video on Germany's strategic partnership with Ukraine, this was not a one-off arms delivery. It was the architecture of permanent industrial integration. The second event was quieter but arguably more significant. In Oslo, Norway and Ukraine formalized a drone production agreement that will see Ukrainian-designed drones manufactured on Norwegian soil. Norway has committed $28 billion to Ukraine across the 2023 to 2030 period, with €7.66 billion earmarked for 2026 alone. Joint drone production is the centerpiece of that commitment. These were not isolated deals, they were the latest nodes in an accelerating network. By April 16th, the Netherlands had signed its own drone deal with Ukraine, committing €248 million, later expanded to €482 million for joint manufacturing on Dutch territory. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her intention to join the same framework. Denmark, Sweden, France, Latvia, Lithuania, the United Kingdom, and even Gulf states including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE were already inside the format. In other words, when the Russian Defense Ministry hit publish on that Telegram post, it was not reacting to a single shipment. It was reacting to the emergence of a continent-wide drone industrial base, one that Russia cannot bomb, cannot sanction, and cannot outproduce. Let us look at what that industrial base actually looks like, because the numbers explain why Moscow is panicking. On the same day the Russian list went live, British Defense Secretary John Healey stood at a podium in Berlin and announced the United Kingdom's largest ever drone package for Ukraine, more than 120,000 drones, to be delivered before the end of 2026. The contract is worth approximately £752 million, roughly $1 billion, and is backed by the UK's broader £3 billion military support commitment for the year. 3 British manufacturers, Tekover, Wind Racers, and Malloy Aeronautics, are named as primary suppliers. Every system in the package has already been combat tested in Ukraine. That is one country, one package, 1 year. Germany, through Quantum Systems and Helsing, delivered over 900 advanced reconnaissance and attack drones in 2025. In 2026, it plans to deliver between 5 and 10,000 under the Build with Ukraine program. The Netherlands has committed to manufacturing Ukrainian-designed drones on Dutch soil. The International Drone Coalition, an alliance of more than 20 countries, led by the UK, allocated €2.75 billion in 2025 to support Ukraine's drone requirements. By January 2026, funding from the UK, Denmark, the Netherlands, Latvia, and Sweden had secured deliveries of 30,000 new drones, with tens of thousands more in the pipeline. Meanwhile, Ukraine's own domestic ecosystem continues to expand. With over 160 drone manufacturers, 1,343 drone variants listed on the Brave One marketplace, and an estimated production capacity approaching 8 million FPV drones per year, Ukraine has built the most prolific military drone industry on the planet. Its unmanned systems forces, representing just 2.2% of the army, now account for roughly 35% of confirmed results on the battlefield, at an average cost of $878 per kill. In March 2026, Ukraine outshot Russia in drone deployments for the first time in the war. That is the context Russia is responding to. Not a single factory, not a single shipment, a distributed, redundant, multinational industrial ecosystem that Europe is now hardwiring into its own defense infrastructure. There is a reason Russia published addresses rather than launching missiles. It cannot do anything about those addresses. Every single facility named on the Russian list sits on NATO territory. An attack on any one of them, whether by missile, sabotage team, or cyber operation, would constitute an attack on a NATO member state, triggering the obligation of collective defense under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. As former US Ambassador to Ukraine Stephen Pfeiffer put it bluntly in the days following the list's publication, given that the Russian military at this point has its hands completely full with the war in Ukraine, does Russia really want to pick a fight with NATO countries? The answer, evidently, is no. Russia does not have the conventional military capacity to sustain a war in Ukraine, while simultaneously opening a front against NATO's industrial base in Western Europe. Its air force is already stretched thin. Its precision missile stocks are periodically depleted. Its navy, having lost over a third of its Black Sea fleet to Ukrainian strikes, is in no position to project power westward. And its ground forces, absorbing over 11,000 casualties on the southern front alone in a matter of weeks, as we covered recently, are locked in an attritional grind that leaves no spare capacity for adventurism. What Russia can do, and has been doing, is sabotage. This is where the story takes a darker turn, and where the list published on April 15th should be read not just as bluster, but as a potential operational signal. Because the list did not emerge in a vacuum. It follows a well-documented, intensifying campaign of Russian-linked sabotage operations across Europe, one that Western intelligence agencies have been tracking with growing alarm since 2024. To understand the weight of what Medvedev said, you first need to understand who Medvedev has become. President of Russia from 2008 to 2012, he once presented himself as a liberal reformer, a man who spoke the language of democratic partnership with the West. That version of Medvedev no longer exists. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he has transformed into one of the most aggressive voices in Moscow's political establishment, delivering nuclear threats on social media, calling for the destruction of European capitals, and performing the role of controlled extremist with apparent relish. Western analysts debate whether Medvedev speaks for Putin or merely says out loud what the Kremlin wants implied but not officially stated. In either case, his words carry institutional weight. He remains deputy chairman of the Security Council. He has access, he has authority, and when he designates European factories as legitimate targets, the statement cannot simply be dismissed as the rantings of a retired politician. The International Institute for Strategic Studies documented a 246% increase in European critical infrastructure incidents from 2023 to 2024, the majority attributed to Russian military intelligence, the GRU. Incendiary devices disguised as consumer goods ignited in DHL logistics hubs in Birmingham and Leipzig in the summer of 2024. A Ukrainian-owned warehouse in East London was set ablaze in a GRU-directed arson attack in March 2024. The perpetrators were later convicted. An IKEA store in Vilnius was firebombed in May 2024, and Lithuanian prosecutors confirmed GRU involvement. A shopping center in Warsaw, housing over 1,300 retail stores, was destroyed by arson in the same month, with Polish investigators tracing the operation back to a GRU officer in Russia. In 2024, Western intelligence foiled a Russian plot to assassinate the CEO of Rheinmetall, Germany's largest defense contractor. In September 2025, Lithuanian authorities charged 15 people with terrorism offenses connected to the Sabotage campaign. NATO described the threat level from Russian sabotage as record high. Now consider the sequence. Russia's intelligence services have been physically attacking European logistics networks, defense-linked businesses, and critical infrastructure for over 2 years. The Defense Ministry has now published a public list of specific addresses, drone factories, and a senior Russian official has called them legitimate military targets. Even if the list is primarily intended as psychological warfare, it also functions as something far more operational, a targeting guide for sabotage cells already embedded across Europe. The Czech Republic understood this immediately. On April 16th, Czech Foreign Minister Petr Machinka summoned the Russian ambassador in Prague to explain the threats. 2 Czech companies had been named on the list. The Foreign Ministry stated bluntly that Czech firms had been identified as possible targets of Russian attacks. Moscow has not publicly responded to the diplomatic protest. Now consider what the list tells us about Russia's intelligence picture and its limitations. Meduza, the independent Russian language news outlet, noted something revealing about the Defense Ministry's first list. One of the Munich addresses, Lerchenauer Strasse 28, turned out to be a residential building. Lithuanian public broadcaster LRT reported that the Vilnius street named by Russia hosts over 700 registered companies, none of which appeared linked to the military firms mentioned. In other words, the targeting data that Russia published with such theatrical menace contains errors that would embarrass a competent intelligence service. This is not unusual for Moscow's approach to information warfare. The point of the list was never pinpoint accuracy. It was intimidation, aimed at European publics, at the workers in those factories, at the politicians who signed those drone deals. The message is simple: we know where you are, and we can reach you. The problem for Russia is that Europe's response has not been fear. It has been acceleration. Within 48 hours of the list publication, the Netherlands signed its drone deal with Ukraine. Italy began formal negotiations. The UK confirmed its 120,000 drone package. France announced an €8.5 billion investment to increase drone and missile stocks by 400% before 2030. Germany confirmed a separate €10 billion commitment to military drones. The EU launched its 2026 European Drone Defense Initiative, aimed at building a multi-layered counter-drone shield by 2027, alongside its drone alliance with Ukraine for co-production of millions of UAVs. Russia published a hit list. Europe responded by building more factories. There is a structural lesson here that goes beyond this week's headlines. For decades, European defense production was fragmented, underfunded, and largely dependent on American systems. The war in Ukraine, and specifically the drone revolution it has unleashed, is forcing a transformation that no amount of white papers and summit communiques ever managed to achieve. Ukraine's battlefield expertise is now the catalyst for Europe's defense industrial integration. The format that Zelensky's team has built, the drone deal, is elegant in its logic. Ukraine provides the combat-tested technology, the battlefield data, and the operational expertise. European partners provide the industrial capacity, the financing, and the territorial security that comes with NATO membership. The drones are manufactured on European soil, which means they cannot be interdicted on their way to Ukraine. They are tested in real combat, which means each iteration improves faster than anything developed in peacetime laboratories. And the production is distributed across a dozen countries, which means no single strike, conventional or covert, can shut the system down. The list of countries inside the format now reads like a roll call of European industrial power. Germany, the United Kingdom, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, France, Italy, plus non-European partners including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States. Each brings different strengths. The UK brings its Tekever reconnaissance platforms and Malloy heavy-lift logistics drones. Germany brings quantum systems and Helsing's AI targeting capability. Norway brings Arctic-rated manufacturing and deep financial commitment. The Netherlands, which committed €482 million in a single announcement, brings precision engineering and component production. Together, they are creating something that has no precedent in modern military history: a real-time, combat-tested, multinational drone production network that improves with every engagement. As we explored in our previous video on Ukraine's drone war milestone, this is precisely the kind of distributed, adaptive production model that Russia's centralized military-industrial complex cannot replicate. Russia's drone production remains concentrated in a handful of facilities, most notably the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan, where tens of thousands of Shahed variant drones have been manufactured. Ukraine has been systematically striking Russian drone factories and assembly plants for months. But Europe's drone network is beyond Russia's reach. It sits behind the largest military alliance in human history. That asymmetry is what Medvedev's post was really about, not strength, frustration. The recognition that Europe is building something Russia cannot stop, and the only tool left in the box is the threat of escalation that Moscow knows it cannot follow through on. Sergei Shoigu, Secretary of Russia's Security Council, added his own layer of menace in the days following the list's publication. He warned that Moscow reserves the right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter if foreign countries provide their airspace for drone strikes against Russian territory. Russia's ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, said the publication was intended to encourage European leaders to abandon the escalation. Dmitry Polyansky, Russia's representative to the OSCE, warned that establishing drone production enterprises in EU countries risks dragging those nations into a direct war with Russia. The language is calibrated to sound like a warning, but read carefully, it is actually an admission. Russia is telling Europe, you are becoming a permanent part of this war, and we cannot stop you. The plea is dressed up as a threat, but at its core, it is a request. Stop building, stop producing, stop helping. Europe's answer, delivered not in words but in signed contracts, production schedules, and factory openings, has been unambiguous. No. One final detail worth noting. Ukraine now uses approximately 9,000 drones per day on the front lines, roughly 270,000 per month. Russia launched approximately 6,500 one-way attack drones at Ukraine in March 2026 alone, a record monthly total. The average was 208 per day, peaking at 948 launches in a single 24-hour period on March 23rd. This is industrial warfare on a scale not seen since the middle of the 20th century. The difference is that the factories are no longer behind the front lines. They are scattered across an entire continent, protected by the collective security guarantee of 32 nations, and producing at a rate that rises with every Russian threat. Medvedev published his list on a Tuesday evening. By Thursday, Europe had signed 3 new drone deals. By the following week, the EU had committed billions more to drone production and counter-drone systems. A list of 21 addresses, published as a warning, received as a dare, and the factories kept running.